Something is fighting for your silence, and it is not human. Every time you kneel, distractions multiply, doubts whisper, and fatigue settles over your soul like a heavy fog. This is not coincidence, it is resistance. There is an unseen battle waged in the quiet places of your life where your voice reaches heaven and shakes the darkness. The enemy understands what many forget. Prayer is not a ritual, it is a weapon. It aligns your will with God's authority, summons strength you do not possess, and breaks chains you cannot see. That is why he wants you busy, numb, scrolling, postponing the moment you speak to God. He fears the clarity that comes when you pray, the courage that rises, the protection that surrounds you. He trembles at the thought of a believer who refuses to be silent, who prays when it is hard, who calls on God when everything feels uncertain. If he can keep you from praying, he can keep you from power. If he can weaken your prayer, he can weaken your purpose. And so the battle begins before you even open your mouth, and every hesitation becomes an opening the enemy eagerly tries to exploit. From the moment you begin to pray, something shifts in the unseen realm. The enemy loses ground the instant your heart turns toward God. Prayer is not just words spoken into the air. It is a declaration of allegiance that disrupts the enemy's influence over your life. When you pray, you step out of his control and into divine authority. That is why he works tirelessly to keep you distracted, exhausted, and disconnected from God. He understands that as long as you remain prayerless, you remain easier to deceive. Without prayer, your thoughts become vulnerable to fear, confusion, and doubt. But when you pray, clarity begins to replace chaos, and truth begins to silence every lie that once held power over your mind. The enemy cannot dominate a mind that is constantly renewed in the presence of God. Prayer strengthens your spirit in ways that nothing else can. It awakens a boldness within you that refuses to bow to fear or intimidation. The enemy knows that a person who prays consistently becomes difficult to control and impossible to contain. Chains begin to break when prayer becomes your lifestyle, and strongholds begin to crumble when your voice rises in faith. This is why the enemy fights hardest when you decide to take prayer seriously. Every time you choose to pray, you are resisting his influence and rejecting his lies. You are declaring that your life does not belong to fear, but to God. The enemy loses his grip when you refuse to stay silent and instead call upon the name of the Lord. He fears your persistence because he knows that breakthrough often comes to those who refuse to give up in prayer. There is power in your voice when it is lifted in faith, even when you feel weak or uncertain. The enemy wants you to believe that your prayers are ineffective, that nothing is changing, and that God is not listening. But those are lies designed to keep you from pressing forward. The truth is that every prayer you pray is making an impact in the spiritual realm. Every word spoken in faith weakens the enemy's hold and strengthens your connection with God. This is why he resists your prayers so fiercely. He knows that if he can silence you, he can limit your growth and delay your breakthrough. But the moment you recognize this strategy, you begin to fight back with greater intensity. You begin to pray not out of obligation, but out of understanding that your prayers carry authority and power. The more you pray, the more you reclaim the ground the enemy tried to steal, and the more you walk in the freedom that God has already given you through his presence and power working within you every single day as you continue to seek him with unwavering faith and determination that cannot be shaken by fear or doubt, even when circumstances seem unchanged and opposition feels strong around you in every direction. Pressing against your peace and confidence in God, you choose to stand firm. And keep praying because you understand that victory is not determined by what you see, but by what God is doing beyond your sight and understanding in ways that are greater than your imagination and deeper than your fears, and stronger than any force that tries to rise against you in the unseen battle for your life and your purpose. Through persistent prayer, you push back darkness and establish light in places the enemy once occupied, and you continue advancing forward with courage and unshakable resolve every moment. Silence in prayer is not neutral. It creates a space where spiritual vulnerability begins to grow unnoticed. When prayer fades, awareness weakens, and the connection that once brought strength, clarity, and direction starts to diminish. The enemy does not need immediate destruction. He only needs distance between you and God. That distance often begins quietly with missed moments of prayer, delayed conversations with God, and a gradual shift towards self-reliance instead of divine dependence. In that silence, thoughts begin to drift without guidance. Worry feels louder, fear feels closer, and confusion becomes more persuasive. Without prayer anchoring your heart, your emotions can be influenced by circumstances instead of truth. The enemy takes advantage of this vulnerability, planting subtle lies that seem reasonable at first but slowly shape your mindset. He does not rush. He works patiently, knowing that a disconnected soul becomes easier to influence over time. Prayer acts as a shield, guarding your mind and spirit against these unseen attacks. When that shield is lowered, even slightly, it opens the door for doubt to enter. You may not recognize it immediately, but hesitation begins to replace confidence, and uncertainty begins to replace faith. What once felt secure starts to feel unstable, not because God has moved, but because the connection has weakened through silence. There is also a loss of sensitivity when prayer is absent. The ability to discern right from wrong, truth from deception, and peace from false comfort becomes blurred. The enemy thrives in that confusion because it allows him to redirect your focus without resistance. When you are not praying, you are not listening. And when you are not listening, you are more likely to follow the wrong voice. Silence in prayer also affects your strength in moments of challenge. When trials come, and they always do, a prayerless life feels unprepared. Instead of responding with faith, you may react with fear or frustration. The enemy counts on this reaction because it weakens your stance and makes you question your ability to overcome. But a life rooted in prayer responds differently, standing firm even when circumstances seem overwhelming. The longer the silence continues, the deeper the vulnerability becomes. It is not always obvious, but it is always present. You may appear strong on the outside, but internally there is a growing disconnect that affects your peace, your confidence, and your sense of purpose. The enemy's goal is not just to stop your prayers, but to keep you comfortable in that silence so that you do not recognize what you are losing. Breaking that silence requires awareness and intentionality. It requires recognizing that prayer is not optional but essential for spiritual stability. The moment you return to prayer, the vulnerability begins to close and the connection begins to restore. Strength returns, clarity sharpens, and the lies that once seemed convincing begin to lose their power. Every moment of silence can either become a place of weakness or an opportunity to rise again in prayer, to reclaim your focus, and to rebuild what was slowly being lost as the battle continues in ways that demand vigilance, persistence, and a heart that refuses to remain quiet. When it was created to seek God in every moment of need and dependence, as distractions continue to compete for your attention and your time pulling you further away from the place, where your strength is renewed and your spirit is fortified against every form of attack that seeks to weaken your resolve and your commitment to stay connected through constant and intentional prayer. Distraction rarely appears as something dangerous. It often feels harmless, even necessary, blending into daily routines until it quietly begins to take control of your focus. The enemy understands that he does not always need to confront you directly. He can simply divert your attention. When your mind is constantly occupied with noise, tasks, notifications, and endless streams of information, your ability to center yourself in prayer becomes weakened. It is not that you refuse to pray, but that your attention is pulled in so many directions that prayer is pushed aside. These distractions are carefully layered. They begin with small interruptions, moments that seem insignificant, but over time they build a pattern of disconnection. You may intend to pray, but something always seems to come up. A message, a thought, a task, or even fatigue becomes the reason to delay. The enemy thrives in this delay because every postponed moment of prayer is a moment where your spiritual awareness is slightly reduced. Distraction also affects the depth of your prayer. Even when you take time to pray, your thoughts may wander, your focus may break, and your words may feel scattered. Instead of entering into a place of peace and connection, your mind remains divided. The enemy uses this divided attention to weaken the impact of your prayer life, making it feel less effective and less meaningful. Over time, this can lead to frustration, causing you to believe that prayer is not working as it should. There is a strategy behind this. A distracted mind struggles to engage fully with God. It becomes harder to listen, harder to reflect, and harder to receive clarity. The enemy knows that if he can keep your mind busy, he can keep your spirit distant. He fills your environment with noise so that the still, quiet voice of God becomes harder to recognize. In that noise, important moments of spiritual connection are missed. Distraction also creates a false sense of productivity. You may feel busy and active, accomplishing many things throughout the day, yet spiritually empty. The enemy wants you to measure your day by activity rather than connection. When busyness replaces devotion, your priorities begin to shift without you realizing it. What once held deep importance, like prayer, becomes secondary to everything else demanding your attention. The more distracted you become, the easier it is for negative thoughts to enter unnoticed. Without focused prayer, there is less resistance against fear, doubt, and anxiety. These thoughts can settle into your mind without challenge, slowly influencing your emotions and decisions. The enemy does not need to force his way in. Distraction leaves the door slightly open. Breaking free from distraction requires intentional focus. It requires choosing moments of stillness even when everything around you is moving quickly. When you resist distraction, you create space for clarity, peace, and strength to return. You begin to notice how powerful a focused moment of prayer can be, how it restores balance and sharpens your awareness. Each time you overcome distraction, you take back control of your attention and realign your heart with God. The battle for your focus is ongoing, but every victory strengthens your ability to remain present, aware, and connected as you continue to guard your mind against anything that tries to pull you away from the discipline of consistent prayer and the deeper awareness that comes when your thoughts are no longer scattered, but anchored in a place of intentional stillness and unwavering focus on God. Consistent prayer activates divine protection and authority in ways that go beyond human understanding. Each time you enter into prayer, you step into alignment with a power that is greater than fear, greater than opposition, and greater than any force that attempts to rise against you. This is not symbolic language. It is a spiritual reality that begins to unfold the moment your heart connects with God. The enemy recognizes this activation, and that is why he resists consistency more than anything else. Consistency in prayer builds a covering over your life that cannot be easily broken. It is developed over time through repeated moments of faith, even when you do not feel strong or motivated. The enemy prefers occasional prayer because it lacks the sustained authority that comes from discipline. But when prayer becomes consistent, it creates a rhythm that strengthens your spirit and reinforces your connection with God. With consistency, protection begins to surround you in ways you may not immediately see. There are dangers you avoid, decisions you make with clarity, and paths you walk away from without fully realizing why. Prayer sharpens your awareness and positions you to move wisely. The enemy loses opportunities when you are covered in prayer because his strategies depend on confusion and misdirection, both of which are weakened when you remain connected to God. Authority is also activated through consistent prayer. It is not something you manufacture on your own, but something that flows from your relationship with God. The more you pray, the more you begin to understand who you are spiritually. Fear loses its hold and confidence begins to rise. The enemy cannot easily intimidate someone who knows their authority and walks in it daily through a life committed to prayer. There is also a strengthening of endurance that comes with consistency. Challenges do not disappear, but your ability to face them changes. You become steady, less shaken by sudden problems, and more grounded in faith. The enemy relies on instability, hoping to catch you off guard, but consistent prayer prepares you before the battle even becomes visible. It builds resilience that keeps you standing when pressure increases. Consistency also deepens your awareness of God's presence. It becomes easier to recognize his guidance and respond to his direction. You begin to notice patterns of protection, moments of intervention, and a growing sense of peace that cannot be explained by circumstances. The enemy cannot operate freely in a life that is continually aware of God's presence, because that awareness exposes deception and strengthens discernment. As you continue in consistent prayer, you begin to see how authority and protection work together, forming a defense that grows stronger over time. The enemy becomes more limited in his influence, and your life becomes more aligned with God's purpose. Each moment of prayer adds to this foundation, reinforcing your strength and expanding your spiritual awareness in ways that continue to develop as you remain faithful, disciplined, and focused on maintaining a connection that does not weaken under pressure, but continues to grow even in the midst of opposition and uncertainty as challenges shift and new battles emerge, requiring deeper dependence and a stronger commitment to remain anchored in prayer. Where protection continues to surround you and authority continues to increase, as your consistency becomes a defining part of your daily walk with God and shapes every decision you make and every step you take forward, while reinforcing your identity as someone who refuses to be shaken by fear or distracted by anything that tries to pull you away from this place of power. And doubt is one of the most subtle and effective tools used to weaken your connection with God. It does not always arrive as a loud or obvious voice. More often it whispers quietly, planting small questions that slowly grow into uncertainty. The enemy understands that if he can make you question the power of prayer, the presence of God, or the value of your faith, he can begin to weaken your spiritual foundation without direct confrontation. It often begins with situations that do not change immediately. You pray, but the answer seems delayed. You believe, but circumstances remain the same. In those moments, doubt tries to convince you that nothing is happening, that your prayers are ineffective, and that your faith is misplaced. These thoughts may seem natural, but they are carefully timed to pull you away from persistence and into hesitation. Doubt affects how you approach God. Instead of coming with confidence, you may begin to hold back, unsure if your prayers matter or if they are even heard. This hesitation creates distance, and that distance weakens the connection that prayer is meant to strengthen. The enemy does not need you to stop praying completely. He only needs you to pray with uncertainty, because uncertain prayer lacks the boldness that carries authority. When doubt takes root, it begins to shape your expectations. You may start expecting disappointment instead of breakthrough, delay instead of response, silence instead of guidance. This shift changes your mindset, and over time, it influences your actions. You may pray less, believe less, and trust less, all because doubt has slowly replaced confidence. Doubt also distorts your perception of God. It can make you question His faithfulness, His timing, and His willingness to intervene in your life. The enemy uses past disappointments, unanswered prayers, and difficult experiences as evidence to support these lies. He builds a narrative that suggests God is distant or inactive, even when the truth is the opposite. Without resistance, these thoughts can settle deeply into your mind. The danger of doubt is that it often feels reasonable. It presents itself as logic, as realism, as a way to protect yourself from disappointment. But in reality, it limits your faith and weakens your ability to trust God fully. The enemy uses this false sense of reasoning to keep you from stepping into deeper belief and stronger connection. Overcoming doubt requires intentional faith. It means choosing to believe even when you do not see immediate results. It means continuing to pray even when answers seem delayed. Each time you resist doubt, you strengthen your connection with God and weaken the influence of the enemy. Faith grows through persistence, and confidence is built through continued trust. As you continue to push back against doubt, your perspective begins to shift. You start to recognize that God is working even when you cannot see it, and that silence does not mean absence. The enemy loses ground when doubt is replaced with trust, and your prayers begin to carry renewed strength and clarity as your heart becomes more aligned with truth and your mind becomes more guarded against every subtle lie that tries to take root and influence your belief system. While you continue to stand firm, refusing to allow uncertainty to control your faith or weaken your commitment to remain connected to God through persistent and intentional prayer. A praying believer becomes a powerful force against darkness because prayer transforms weakness into strength and uncertainty into authority. The moment a person commits to a life of prayer, they begin to operate from a place that is no longer limited by human ability. The enemy recognizes this transformation and understands that a believer who prays consistently cannot be easily controlled, discouraged, or defeated. Prayer shifts the foundation of your life from instability to spiritual strength that continues to grow with every moment spent in God's presence. This kind of power does not come from perfection, but from persistence. A praying believer is not someone who never struggles, but someone who refuses to remain silent in the middle of struggle. Every time you choose to pray instead of giving in to fear, you are strengthening your position against the forces that are trying to weaken you. The enemy loses influence when you replace panic with prayer and confusion with connection to God. There is a boldness that develops in a life rooted in prayer. It is not loud or arrogant, but steady and unshakable. This boldness allows you to stand firm even when circumstances seem overwhelming. The enemy relies on intimidation, hoping to make you feel small, powerless, and alone. But a praying believer knows they are never alone, and that awareness changes everything. Fear begins to lose its grip when you understand the authority that comes from being connected to God. Prayer also equips you to respond rather than react. In moments of pressure, instead of being driven by emotion, you are guided by clarity. The enemy often creates chaos in an attempt to provoke impulsive decisions, but prayer brings stillness and focus. A praying believer learns to pause, to seek direction, and to move with wisdom rather than haste. This ability to respond with intention disrupts the enemy's plans and limits his opportunities to create damage. As your prayer life deepens, your influence begins to extend beyond yourself. The strength you gain is not only for your own battles, but also for those around you. Your prayers begin to cover your family, your environment, and situations you may never fully see. The enemy is threatened by this expansion because it multiplies the impact of your faith. A single praying believer can bring light into places that were once dominated by darkness. There is also a growing awareness of spiritual authority that comes with consistent prayer. You begin to recognize that your words carry weight when they are aligned with God's will. The enemy cannot easily stand against a believer who understands their authority and uses it through prayer. This is why he works so hard to create doubt, distraction, and silence, because all of these weaken the expression of that authority. The more you pray, the more your identity becomes rooted in strength rather than fear. You begin to see yourself differently, not as someone trying to survive, but as someone equipped to overcome. The enemy's strategies become easier to recognize, and his influence becomes easier to resist. This transformation does not happen overnight, but it develops through consistent and intentional prayer that builds confidence, clarity, and resilience. As this power continues to grow, your life becomes a reflection of what happens when someone refuses to remain passive in the face of spiritual opposition, and instead chooses to stand firm with unwavering faith and commitment to prayer, allowing strength to rise in every moment of weakness and courage to replace fear as you continue to press forward with a mindset that is no longer easily shaken or distracted, but firmly grounded in the authority and power that comes from a deep and consistent connection with God through prayer that continues to shape your thoughts, your actions, and your responses in ways that push back darkness and establish light wherever you go and in every situation you face. The battle over your prayer life is more serious than it appears because it determines the strength of your connection with God and the level of influence the enemy can have over your life. Every distraction, every doubt, and every moment of silence is part of a strategy designed to weaken your faith and separate you from the source of your strength. But once you recognize this, everything changes. You begin to see prayer not as an obligation, but as a lifeline, a weapon, and a source of authority that cannot be ignored. When you choose to pray consistently, even when it feels difficult or unnecessary, you are stepping into a place of protection, clarity, and power. You are refusing to give the enemy access to your thoughts, your emotions, and your direction. Instead, you are aligning yourself with God's presence, where strength is renewed and purpose becomes clear. The difference between a vulnerable life and a victorious one is often found in the discipline of prayer. Those who remain persistent in prayer develop resilience, awareness, and unshakable faith that cannot be easily overcome. The enemy may fight to silence you, but every time you choose to pray, you rise stronger, more focused, and more aligned with the power that leads you forward in every battle you face.